Part 37. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Amos Yenyu. Chapter 361. What's going on? As the earth trembled and the mountains shook, a tall devil's palace suddenly emerged from the depths of the earth. The surrounding high-rise buildings were instantly crushed and collapsed by the huge palace. From a distance, the huge palace looks like the hideous head of a demon, eerie and terrifying. That's the giant palace on the last level of the divine continent. Luo Ziyuan led a group of rebels to stabilize their bodies and looked up at the devil's palace rising from the ground, with a look of horror in his eyes. A huge palace that looks like a demon's ferocious head stands on the opposite bank of the terminal building, and the two giant buildings vaguely form a confrontation. Mu Qiu, who was wearing the heavy armor of a demonic dragon and a demon mask, was sitting on the floating skull throne. Megatama hovered in the blood-red pupils, and the whole body was surrounded by boundless black energy, looking in all directions. Even the Zilan base below, which has a large number of people, can't help but feel frightened when faced with the sudden domineering intimidation. That palace, how is that possible? When I saw the eerie devil's palace, the most shocking thing was the nightmare in red robe. The dim light flickered under the white mask, and he knew the origin of this palace very clearly. This devil's palace comes from the ominous abyss on the last level of the divine continent, the restricted area that even he dare not easily set foot on. Nightmare once used the incarnation of thousands of souls to create a soul space called the Divine Realm, in an attempt to absorb the soul power of players. But at the moment when the soul space was about to condense, an unknown powerful energy suddenly injected into the soul space he created. And that strange and ominous abyss was created by the injection of that unknown energy. It seems real but not imaginary, between illusion and reality. The entire wasteland is embedded in the soul space carefully designed by the nightmare. Even with the power of nightmares, this strange wasteland abyss cannot be separated from the divine realm. It can only be set as the last layer of the divine realm, wandering at the edge of the divine world. That demonic dragon in the abyss, when did it? Nightmare looked at the figure sitting on the skull throne in the sky with deep eyes. As the founder of the divine world, he clearly remembered that there was a demon dragon with dragon veins in the abyss of the wasteland. Even nightmares dare not touch its edge with its powerful destructive strength. Players based on their soul status alone cannot be the opponent of that magic dragon. The so-called last level is simply a trap. If the Lord of Eternal Night hadn't appeared out of nowhere and blocked their original plan. Otherwise, all players existing in God's domain should turn into pure soul energy and be swallowed by nightmares. Everyone in the Zilan base on the side was also frightened by the huge palace that suddenly appeared underground, and they barely managed to stabilize themselves as the earth shook. However, at this moment, a thin figure rose into the air holding two broken blades and sickles. Kama Itaki. Just when everyone was in a daze, they saw a sickle wearing a combat uniform flying through the air, heading straight towards Mu Qiu in the sky. The body of the sickle turned into wind, and flashed behind Mu Qiu like a bolt of lightning. But the figure wearing the devil mask seemed to be unresponsive and motionless. Waves of evil laughter burst out from Kamamataka's mouth, and the broken blade sickles in his hands shone with an icy cold light. It seemed as if the blade of death was about to cut through that slender neck in the next second. At this moment, tens of thousands of eyes were staring at the two figures in mid-air. However, under everyone's widened gazes, Kamitachi dropped the two sickles with a wave of his hand, and covered the mask's eyelids with his hands. Guess who I am? Kamataka's voice was no longer crazy, but rather charming. An inappropriate remark instantly made everyone in the audience stunned. Mu Qiu's voice under the mask was calm. If you still appear in front of me like this, you don't have to change back again. As soon as Mu Qiu finished speaking, the silly weasel behind him suddenly trembled his arm and looked embarrassed. How come? I saw Kama attack his whole body suddenly erupting into a burst of faint purple mist. Along with a clicking sound of fragmentation, the body of Kama Itaki began to show spiderweb-like fragments. Lord Muchu. A soft-to-the-bone voice echoed between heaven and earth. I saw a slim female figure walking out of the mist on a catwalk. Wearing a slim-fitting red cheongsam, her plump and voluptuous figure is undoubtedly revealed, and her face is extremely charming. A beauty mole under the corner of her eye adds a bit of coquettishness. It's Sister Lu. In the alley below, Mao Yuming, who had transformed back into a half-grown boy, instantly recognized the identity of this charming woman. The visitor was none other than Lu Qianqian, who came to Zilan base with Muchu and then disappeared without a trace. Illusion? Damn it, when exactly? Long Haoang's expression became even more embarrassing as he transformed into the folds of a dragon's body. 6 of the 8 knights of Fenglan have died, and now even Kama Itaki has been replaced without even realizing it. The Fenglan knights were almost completely wiped out. Lord Muchu, I have completed all the tasks you gave me. Lu Qianqian pressed her face against the skull throne, speaking in a friendly tone and exhaling like blue. Well done. Muchu, who was under the mask, nodded slightly. As early as the night when the rebels attacked the biochemical factory, he asked Lu Qianqian to use illusion to replace the position of the sickle weasel and sneak into the terminal brain building. There, Lu Qianqian not only obtained many experimental secrets of the Zilan base, but also secretly made a lot of small moves by using her identity in the Fenglan Knights. For example, in the secret forest, it was Lu Qianqian who turned into a sickle weasel and left the map and information to guide Muchu and Fanyan into the stone statue. It seems that our top secrets have been leaked. In the team of the Zilan base, Zhou Xiang, who had long green wavy hair, had a hoarse voice and could not tell whether he was happy or angry. Beside him, Long Haoang had blue veins on his forehead, and looked at Lu Qianqian with murderous eyes. So you are the spy hidden in the base. As early as when many players were trapped in the God's Domain world at the beginning, a mysterious person leaked the inside story of the God's Domain to other human bases. Long Haoang had suspected many people, but he had never expected that this person would be the loyal sickle weasel beside him. In response to Long Haoang's hateful gaze, Lu Qianqian, who was standing behind the skull throne, responded with a playful grimace, and several foxtails vaguely appeared behind her. They know too many secrets of the base, so if that's the case, we must keep them. Zhou Xiang narrowed his eyes, and there was no expression on his pale face. For the Lord of Eternal Night, who was famous far and wide, he was not absolutely sure to keep him. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 362. As soon as Zhou Xiang finished speaking, countless artillery fires that had been aimed at the sky were fired at Muchu at the first time. The sky was filled with artillery fire lasers that gathered like gorgeous fireworks, and the target was the magic armor figure on the throne. Facing the surging barrage, Muchu, who was wearing the magic dragon heavy armor on the throne, remained motionless, as if he was the supreme monarch who was not afraid of danger on the battlefield. A blood-red light curtain rose in front of the palace, and the laser artillery fire that shot in instantly exploded on the blood-red barrier. The violent aftermath of the explosion caused the secondary collapse of the surrounding buildings, and the collapsed ruins even stirred up a large area of diffuse smoke. When the smoke dissipated, the figure wearing a demon mask sat intact on the floating throne. The laser shells that were enough to destroy a city area were difficult to break even the blood-red barrier. As the leader of a major force, the strength of the Lord of Eternal Night should not be underestimated. The next moment, with Long Haoang's order, combat troops from all directions launched a fierce attack towards Muchu at the same time. Hundreds of mechas were ejected, followed by countless tall combat robots. Following closely behind were combat team members armed with live ammunition. However, as the large army advanced, black shadows appeared on the ground under their feet. As the black shadows floated, dark monsters of different bodies emerged from the abyss underground. The black monsters had red eyes, but no expression could be seen on their dark faces. In a flash, these black shadow monsters fought fiercely with those combat troops. The black shadow monsters were powerful, ranging from sea level to A level, and some even had supernatural powers. The elite troops of Zilan base fell into a dilemma the moment they fought with them. At this moment, mysterious figures in black robes continued to emerge in the surrounding sky, and there were also purple-robed people in the middle. Heterogeneous followers. The wind howled, and the next moment these evil followers from the heterogeneous religion also attacked the skull throne at the same time. The hoods of some followers were swept by the wind, just revealing the faces hidden under the hoods. These heterogeneous followers turned out to be half-orcs with modified bodies. The so-called combat troops and Fenglin knights are just superficial combat power. These half-orcs with strong physiques after inhuman transformation are the hidden main force of Zilan base. A large number of modified monsters attacked, and Mewtwo could not see any expression under the mask. He only saw him slowly raise his hand, the pupils under the mask slightly opened, and the blood color in his eyes became more intense. A round of jade circulated in the pupils, like a blood moon overlapping, making people unconsciously fall into it. This is his reward after signing in this time. Eternal Mangekyo Sharinan. With his palm facing up, Mewtwo raised his hand again. The blood-red pupils seemed to reflect a world, and the energy in his body also flowed wildly in the operation of the pupil technique. In an instant, the ground under the feet of everyone changed drastically again, rolling and shaking like a dragon turning over. What's more terrifying is that as cracks appeared on the ground, pairs of white skeleton arms also stretched out from the abyss of the ground. Countless white skeletons climbed out of the cracks in the ground, and the shrill wails like the ghosts of the underworld came out of their mouths. These skeletons have different body shapes, some are even wearing armor and holding weapons, and they launched a fierce attack on the creatures around them in an instant. In a blink of an eye, more and more countless skeletons crawled out from the ground, entangled with the heterogeneous cult members with the resentment from the netherworld. What the hell are these? Long Houang looked around, and he couldn't feel any life in either the shadows or the skeletons. Nightmare looked up at Mewtwo. He had recognized the source of these skeletons. It can actually summon all the dead souls that only exist in dreams. What kind of ability is this? On the throne, Mewtwo retracted his arm and felt a slight stinging pain in his right eye. Sure enough, it's still a little unfamiliar to use it for the first time. Depending on the difference between the eyes opened, the abilities produced by the Mangekyo Sharinan are also different. As the overlord of the ominous abyss, Mewtwo has already integrated everything contained in it into his soul. The scene of bones galloping on the ground and evil spirits running rampant is exactly from the pupil technique of Mewtwo's right eye. The ability to turn virtual into real, release the existence in the depths of the soul, and materialize the soul world. Everything can be revealed, nothing cannot be transformed, just like the power of the gods, like the spirit of words. Mewtwo put his hand back on the right half of his face and muttered to himself. God resides in all things in the world. This technique can be called divine prophecy. The war below was still fierce, and countless human warriors in the combat units were either absorbed and contained by the Black Shadow monsters, or pulled into the bottomless Black Shadow world by pairs of dark hands. These Black Shadow monsters with red eyes have no pain and no emotions, they are natural killers in the dark night. On the other hand, the foreign believers who fought with the skeletons died in a more miserable way. These resentful souls baptized by the underworld are full of gloomy resentment, and often kill their opponents in the most cruel way. The limbs are torn apart, blood is flying, and the broken internal organs are even more disgusting. The powerful physique of the orcs became the best vent in front of these resentful skeletons. At this moment, the nightmare in a red robe in the distance suddenly moved. I saw it flying in the air, and its body suddenly exploded into a series of gloomy and evil auras, scattered like evil spirits, attacking Muchu from all directions in the sky. Wherever he passed along the way, whether it was the shadow of the dead or the orc warrior, they were all eroded by the boundless evil spirit, their bodies were turned into embers, and their souls were trapped in the eternal nightmare space. Just when countless evil spirits were about to pour into Muchu's body, strange shadows of butterflies suddenly appeared around the skeleton throne. I saw ripples surging in the air, and countless strange blood-red butterflies flying out. The strange thing is that these butterflies collide with the evil spirits that are flying towards them as if they are purposeful. At the moment when the butterfly collided with the evil spirit, the butterfly was shattered and disappeared, and the evil spirit disappeared. The faint laughter of a girl could be heard in the air. Immediately afterwards, butterflies flying all over the sky appeared in front of Muchu, turning into a barefoot girl wearing a red dress. The girl has delicate appearance, petite body, slightly red cheeks, and a sickly smile in her moist eyes. The next moment, a hint of greed flashed in the girl's eyes. She turned to face the magic armored figure on the throne and said, "Brother, can Dire eat this guy?" Muchu smiled under the mask, "Of course. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 363. Destruction Level. When Dire appeared in front of Muchu, the pupils of Nightmare, who was incarnated by evil spirit in the distance, shrank. He felt a trace of danger on the girl in the red skirt. The girl in front of him was also a powerful person of destruction level. After getting Muchu's permission, Dire had a sweet smile on her pretty face. She glanced at Lucientian, who was leaning against the throne without leaving a trace. The latter shuddered immediately and smiled awkwardly and moved a little distance away. Dire turned around and set her eyes on Nightmare in a red robe. A blood-red fierce look suddenly flashed in the girl's eyes, revealing her sharp tiger teeth. As a soul-based psychic, Nightmare also created a soul space like the divine realm. The soul energy in his body is naturally huge. For Dire, who has the same soul-based ability as her, Nightmare is the best evolutionary food. In an instant, the body of the girl in the red dress was scattered into a group of strange blood-red butterflies, flying in the wind and floating over the entire base. The butterflies in the sky turned into two groups. One group of butterfly shadows flew through the air and hit the Nightmare in a red robe. The other group swooped down like a locust passing through. Above the ground, the battle between the combat troops and the Black Shadow army was still going on. And when these butterflies flew over the soldiers holding guns, they suddenly dispersed into diffuse granular powder. The blood-colored powder fell on the bodies of those soldiers, and the eyes of the elite soldiers turned red in an instant. The eyes were empty, but the expression was extremely crazy, and hysterically launched a suicide attack on the companions beside him. In an instant, the combat troops of Zilan base fell into a tragic situation of killing each other, and the barrage and blood splattered in the crowd. And the Nightmare in the air also saw the butterflies flying towards him. As the red robe fluttered, Nightmare's figure became increasingly dim. Just as the wave of butterfly shadows was about to hit Nightmare's body, Nightmare's figure suddenly turned into afterimages, surrounding it in the air. Hundreds of afterimages surrounded the butterfly shadows in the sky. Strangely, the body shapes and faces of these afterimages were different. The faces ranged from children of a few years old to old men in their twilight years, with illusory figures and wooden expressions. These were all human souls devoured by Nightmare, and now they have all become his soul incarnations. Hundreds of soul phantoms stared at the hovering demon butterfly with wooden expressions, and said at the same time, "Soul-devouring butterfly emperor, what exactly is the reason that you, a destructive level corpse emperor, are driven by the Lord of Eternal Night?" There was a chilling chill in the mixed voice. Dire's true form was the destructive level overlord of Lannan City, soul-devouring butterfly emperor. A girl's sweet laughter came from the swirling butterflies. Okay, I'll tell you if you let me eat you. In a flash, the flying butterflies spread like waves, flapping their wings and crashing into the surrounding soul phantoms. The fierce battle below was also in full swing. The huge demon palace seemed to be in confrontation with the technology building in the distance, and the skeleton throne suspended in the sky became the supreme throne that dominated everything. However, in the next second, a hot gust of wind suddenly rose, and the air became burning under the rising flames. I saw bursts of blazing flames all over Long Haoang's body, and his skin turned red in an instant, and the whole person was like a boiling volcano. His hands turned into sharp dragon claws, and then a large piece of flame swirled around, and there were flame after images behind him. Long Haoang instantly turned into a flame aurora, soaring into the sky, grabbing towards Mu Chu's head. Long Haoang, who entered the realm of destruction, reached the peak of his physical body in terms of speed and strength. The next second, the dragon claw wrapped in flames was about to crush the head under the mask. Long Haoang's face was ferocious, and his eyes were filled with strong murderous intent. It was this man who took away his chance to advance to the destruction level. However, just as the dragon claw full of murderous intent was about to swing down, a sound of metal clashing echoed throughout the venue. I saw a white figure blocking the dragon claw. The man was wearing a white suit, and his white hair that was almost shoulder length almost covered his eyes. His face was even more stern, as if he had never changed for thousands of years, and his eyes were filled with indifference. The man was surrounded by fragmented space ripples, holding a narrow space fragment. The fragment was covered with broken edges and corners, and the cut was as sharp as a blade, instantly blocking the dragon claw that was coming to kill him. Feeling the strong fluctuations from the dragon claw, the expression on Long Haoang's face was slightly moved. Looking at the cold-faced man in front of him with a horrified expression. Space power. However, the next moment, before he could react, a gust of wind suddenly sounded behind him. Long Haoang turned his head sharply, only to find that the white-haired man had teleported behind him at some point. Without a word, the space-breaking blade in the white-haired man's hand instantly swung down. Long Haoang, who had transformed into a dragon man, subconsciously crossed his arms to block in front of him. The space-breaking blade that cuts everything collided with the tough skin, and a narrow wound was immediately cut on Long Haoang's red arm. Just as he was about to swing his arm to fight back, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. The dragon man body was instantly kicked 100 meters away. Long Haoang was lifted up by the flames and flew into the air. He looked at the white-haired man not far away with fear in his eyes. The white-haired man stood in the air and shook away the traces of blood on the space blade with an expressionless expression. The messy broken hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were full of indifference. Standing in front of the skeleton throne, he looks like an absolutely loyal knight. Then, who is that person? He can actually hurt Long Haoang, so powerful. In a dark alley near the terminal building, the resistance army watched this shocking battle. The corners of Mao Yuming's mouth opened slightly, and he looked at the white-haired man standing in the sky with shocked eyes. Luo Ziyuan on the side seemed to have remembered something. He stared at the figure of the white-haired man and said thoughtfully. It is said that a powerful space awakener appeared in the former Yuhei base, and the entire base's combat troops were controlled by him. To this end, he also set up a special law enforcement force to control order. While killing zombie heretics, he also treated human compatriots mercilessly. Humans in the entire base are intimidated by him. His name is prestigious even in other bases. After the Yanjai dynasty took over the Yuhei base, this strong man also fell under the command of the Lord of Yanjai and was driven by him. Luo Ziyuan stared at the white-haired man in the sky, and the flashing space fluctuations around him seemed to tear the sky apart. He is the former captain of the Yuhei base law enforcement team, who made countless people change their minds after hearing about it. White Death, Ji Yufeng. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 364. White Death. Many rebels, including Mao Yuming, looked at the white-haired man. They felt that he exuded a cold temperament that kept strangers away. They didn't expect that this man was so powerful. Luo Ziyuan frowned and murmured. I have heard of him before. Ji Yufeng is also a very powerful existence in the S level. As a core elite of a faction, Luo Ziyuan also attaches great importance to this kind of information. But now it seems that he can easily injure Long Haoang. Judging from his strength, he is likely to cross the realm and reach destruction level. As Luo Ziyuan's voice fell, the battle between Ji Yufeng and Long Haoang in the sky officially began. Long Haoang seemed to be completely enraged by Ji Yufeng's attack. Sweeping the bleeding wound on his arm, he roared, and a large piece of red flames burned all over his body. In the blink of an eye, Long Haoang's body turned into a residual flame, roaring towards the white figure in the air. Ji Yufeng's eyes were gloomy, as if he was a pool of stagnant water in a silent cold pond. The space on his left hand exploded, the sky was torn apart, and a white space blade was held in his hand. Holding two space-breaking blades, Ji Yufeng's figure flashed in the air. In the blink of an eye, he had collided with Long Haoang's burning body. In an instant, the white and fiery red figures collided violently, the flames and white light intersected, and the surrounding space showed a faint shattering wave. Damn, this space force can actually penetrate the flames. In the battle with Ji Yufeng, the expression on Long Haoang's face became more and more palpitating. Fast. It was too fast. In just a few breaths, the white residual shadow incarnated by Ji Yufeng had attacked him dozens of times. Long Haoang's nerves were unable to react at all, and he could only rely on his tough body to resist the sharp blade from the space cut. In a few blinks of an eye, several fine blood marks appeared on Long Haoang's arm. Long Haoang's eyes flickered, and a boiling flame burst out from his body. The scorching fire wave made Ji Yufeng pause and stay in place. In this moment, Long Haoang actually took out a dark purple energy crystal core, and the flames could be seen faintly rising inside. He swallowed the crystal core in one gulp, and a crisp cracking sound came from his fangs. As the crystal core was swallowed raw, Long Haoang's skin instantly showed reptilian wrinkles, and his long brown hair stood upside down, burning with boiling flames. A tear-like wound burst out on his back, a pair of crimson dragon wings spread out, sharp claws, sharp fangs, and his body suddenly swelled again out of thin air. The degree of his dragon humanization was actually deepened again. Ji Yufeng, who was not far away, saw this scene and his eyes narrowed slightly. At this moment, Long Haoang soared into the sky, turned into a ball of meteor flame and fought with Ji Yufeng again. Just as the battle outside was in full swing, the door of the laboratory on the top floor of the terminal brain building was opened. Zhou Xiang, with long wavy hair, walked in and said to the brain in the giant petri dish in the center of the laboratory with a frivolous look. My lord, there have been some changes in our plan. The base has been attacked by the Eternal Night Dynasty. After a few seconds, a strange mechanical sound echoed in the laboratory. What's the situation? Zhou Xiang frowned and said, I don't know what means the other party used to bypass the detection of the technology wall and directly invaded the terminal brain building. The Lord of Eternal Night is here in person, and the combat troops are about to be unable to resist. Zhou Xiang looked up at the brain, and his weak voice was unusually heavier. Please activate the holy object. Outside the terminal brain building, the fierce battle is about to reach a white-hot stage. On the ground, the well-equipped combat troops fought fiercely with the unpredictable black shadow monsters, and blood and black shadows splashed everywhere. The alien cult members wearing black and purple robes were blocked by the white skeletons from the abyss hell. Resentment and evil thoughts were entangled, limbs and organs were scattered all over the ground, blood stained the earth, and the bloody scene stimulated everyone's senses. And on the high-altitude battlefield, countless flying demon butterflies fought against thousands of soul incarnations entangled with evil spirits, and the powerful soul fluctuations shook people's minds. The most spectacular scene was the battle scene between Ji Yufeng and Long Haoang. The two fought from mid-air to the ground, and large areas of high-rise buildings along the way were destroyed, and countless humans suffered. Some high-rise buildings were charred, and the walls were collapsed by flames, while some buildings were cut off by sharp space blades, and the cuts were smooth. The whole process was seen by Mu Qiu on the floating skeleton throne, but his figure stood still, like an unparalleled monarch who was strategizing on the battlefield. At a certain moment, he seemed to have noticed something and turned his head to look at the towering giant building in the distance. The terminal brain building. Then, a loud bang spread throughout the Zilan base. The earth trembled, tiles and stones flew, and the giant building in front of us was like a sleeping steel beast, turning its huge body. The next moment, the terminal brain building that had been standing in place actually started to move slowly. The smooth walls turned into extremely solid metal armor. The high-rise buildings folded in half and turned into a core device like a hub that shrank in the center of the steel armor. The huge cannon barrel rose on the top of the building, and the click sound like the turning of gears echoed one after another. The entire terminal brain building slowly rose into the air, and a huge wave of flames spewed out from below. In a flash, this towering building turned into a huge battleship. The surrounding buildings were destroyed by the solid steel armor the moment the battleship rose. At the moment the battleship transformed by the terminal brain building rose, everyone's eyes were fixed on this huge steel monster. People who had never seen such a huge armor had dull eyes and were filled with horror. Until then, Luo Ziyuan in the dark alley sighed slowly. Finally appeared one of the three sacred objects of Zilan base. The End Brain Battleship. The huge battleship instantly crushed several tall buildings, as if it was a shadow that would not disperse over the sky above Zilan base. Countless humans were frightened by the sudden huge battleship and were terrified. Facing such a huge steel monster, they simply did not have the courage to fight it. Compared with this skyscraper, they were as inconspicuous as dust on the earth. Is this your last trump card? On the skull throne not far away, Mu Qiu under the mask also stared at this towering giant with a deep look. However, at this moment, the barrel of the End Brain battleship was clearly aimed at Mu Qiu's direction. The extremely terrifying energy gathered on the barrel, and the surrounding evil spirits and black air all dissipated, and the destructive artillery was ready to go. At the same time, Mu Qiu's pupils turned blood red, and the surrounding Megatamo looked like overlapping blood moons. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 365. The huge battleship rising from the ground exuded an unparalleled aura of terror, and the scattered energy fluctuations made everyone below panic. Even the evil aura and smell of blood that permeated the surroundings were absorbed by this huge giant battleship. It's like an ancient giant that covers the sky and the sun, standing over the Zilan base. This is the destruction level sacred object held by Zilan base, the terminal battleship. Has it finally appeared? Zilan base has been forced to this point. Staring at the Qingtian battleship in the sky, Luo Ziyuan's expression became more solemn. Duan Muchen can't sit still. As a former member of the Fenglan Knights, Luo Ziyuan clearly knew some of the secrets among the top management of Zilan base. For example, the controller behind this majestic Qingtian battleship floating in the sky is none other than the leader of the entire Zilan base, Duan Muchen. The entire huge battleship is connected to its brain nerves. The steel armor shell is Duan Muchen's body, and every monitoring system connected in the battleship is Duan Muchen's eyes. The energy source of the battleship is the zombie crystal cores collected and hunted over the years, and the energy contained inside is so huge that it is beyond imagination. It is no exaggeration to say that this terminal battleship is the most powerful city-destroying weapon in the world. Even the strongest city will be reduced to ruins under the bombardment of its artillery fire, destroying the city and cracking the ground. It is extremely powerful. However, the moment the battleship floated into the air, it had already aimed its bright cannon barrel at the skeleton throne standing in the sky. Immediately afterwards, the beams of light converged on the cannon barrel, and the countless evil energies that filled the surroundings were involuntarily absorbed by the battleship's carapace. The shell of this unparalleled battleship seems to be able to absorb all kinds of energy around it and turn it into part of the battleship's energy. The terrifying energy that is constantly condensing on the barrel is becoming more and more heart-stopping. Even the many undead skeletons below can instinctively feel the fear coming from the depths of their souls. Ji Yufeng, who was fighting fiercely with Long Haoang, who had transformed into a dragon in the distance, seemed to feel something. With a sharp look in his eyes, the white figure flashed frequently in the surrounding space, and he was about to move to stop the artillery fire. However, in the next second, a burst of fierce flame suddenly burst out from his side. Ji Yufeng waved the space blade to disperse the flames, and his body stagnated in mid-air. Right in front of him, Long Haoang, whose whole body was wrapped in red flames, blocked him. First, he injected the medicine and then swallowed the homologous crystal core, which had caused some irreversible damage to his body. Just like the previous monsoon wind. The wrinkled skin was dry and cracked, traces of blood burst out, and was burned by red fire in an instant. How can I let you stop my father's plan at this time? A dark smile appeared on Long Haoang's twisted face. He knew the power of the final brain battleship all too well. At this moment, the huge turret-like warship in the distance was completely charged, and a crimson light emerged from the barrel. Boom! The next moment, a giant crimson light beam exploded, and the sound of exploding wind echoed above the entire Zilan base. In an instant, the sky seemed to be torn apart by this blow, and only this crimson light cannon could be seen in the air. Time seemed to be suspended under the bombardment of this light cannon. Under the sky, there was only this bright red light that penetrated the entire venue. In the distance, Mu Qiu, who was sitting on the skull throne, also felt the terrifying energy contained in the light cannon. What is reflected in his eyes is the oncoming destructive light cannon. At this moment, the blood-red pupils under the mask shrank instantly. The 6 megatama circles in his eyes were like overlapping blood moons, and the power of the pupil technique was brought into full play at this moment. A low cry came out of his mouth. Susan, no who. With a loud bang, the destructive light cannon containing terrifying energy was pressed down. All the surrounding tall buildings and human monsters were wiped out in an instant when the red light beam crushed down. Just by the aftermath of the energy, the buildings on both sides turned into ashes. The demon palace, including Mu Qiu, was also covered by this cannon with an aura of extreme destruction. In an instant, smoke and dust were everywhere, the earth roared, and the aftermath of the bombardment alone killed the surrounding human monsters to pieces. The residual power of the artillery continued all the way, and a semicircular ravine appeared on the ground. At the end of the artillery bombardment, a deep pit that went straight to the ground suddenly appeared in front of everyone. What a terrifying power! Is this the sacred object held by the high-level officials? The rebels who were hiding in the dark and waiting for an opportunity looked at the continuous ravines on the ground with horrified eyes, feeling extremely vigilant in their hearts. With their current strength, they might not even be able to see this huge sky-high battleship if they forcefully break through. Luo Ziyuan and other key members looked at the position in the sky shrouded in smoke, holding their breath and concentrating. Look, what is that? An exclamation sounded, turning everyone's eyes to the sky. The sky after being bombarded by the red light cannon was extremely gloomy, with countless smoke and dust filling the sky. When the dust dispersed, a scene that shocked countless people appeared before everyone's eyes. Under the bombardment of that destructive level light cannon, the skeleton throne actually stood intact in the sky. A figure wearing domineering armor sat on the throne. His face could not be seen clearly under the hideous demon mask, but his whole body was filled with an incomparable strong momentum. What was even more frightening was that in front of the skeleton throne, there was actually a huge monster figure. This monster had a dragon head and a human body, and its face was hideous like a demon from hell. It had 2 horns on its head, dark red skin, and its eyes were filled with red. Is that, Long Wei? In the distance, Long Haoang, who was covered with scars, felt a terrifying pressure that made his heart palpitate, and his pupils shrank suddenly. Everyone looked at the huge demon monster in horror at the same time. Then, a ball of red flames rose up and instantly enveloped the entire body of the demon monster. Under the burning of the flames, the flesh and blood of the demon were burned and rotted at a speed visible to the naked eye, turning into an extremely huge skeleton giant standing in front of the skeleton throne. The next moment, endless black air emerged, intertwined with the red flames, and quickly enveloped the huge skeleton giant. And on the skeleton throne guarded by the skeleton giant, Muqiu's pupils were blood red, and the overlapping blood moons were reflected in the rotation of the Megatama. Each Mangekyo Sharinon has its own unique pupil technique and the ability to summon Susanoo. And this skeleton giant was summoned by Muqiu after combining with the body of the flame demon. The flame demon's true body, the complete Susanoo. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 366. After the Susanoo giant transformed by the flame demon appeared, the huge pressure mixed with the dragon's might shocked everyone again. At this moment, the end brain battleship in the distance once again emitted a buzzing sound. The fire flickered on the raised barrel, and another light cannon with destructive energy bombarded. The surrounding space was cracked by this extreme offensive. And this time, there was nothing in front of the light cannon except the skeleton body. At this moment, the black gas and red flames wrapped around the skeleton giant suddenly surged, turning into a dense armor covering the phantom of the skeleton. Half of the body of the skeleton giant transformed by the flame demon was covered by flames, and the other half was wrapped in thick black gas. The armor condensed by flames and black gas looked like armor and dragon scales. It completely turned the skeleton giant into an armored warrior. The next moment, the crimson artillery bombarded the skeleton giant wearing black and red armor, and the destructive artillery fire directly blasted the ground below into collapse. However, what no one expected was that the armor worn by the skeleton giant appeared cracks under the bombardment of the destructive light cannon, But the energy of the light cannon was completely absorbed by the skeleton giant along these cracks, and the giant's skeleton-like body became several times larger again. The diffuse black gas and red flames instantly repaired the broken gaps in the armor. The fire demon who turned into a skeleton giant inherited the ability of Muqiu's original body, devouring. From a distance, the skeleton giant wearing armor and surrounded by black gas and red flames seemed like a heavenly warrior who had descended to the earth with arrogance and unparalleled power. At this time, Muqiu, who had been sitting on the skeleton throne, slowly stood up, and the hideous demon mask was breathtaking. The throne behind him also instantly turned into a shadow and dissipated in the air. All the humans in Zilan base will never forget the scene before their eyes for the rest of their lives. Muqiu, wearing a demon mask, stood on the head of the huge skeleton giant, with a contemptuous tone and a domineering attitude. Anyone who covets the land of eternal night will die. As Muqiu's voice fell, a beam of dark purple light suddenly flashed in front of his chest. When the light disc landed in the hands of the skeleton giant, it turned into a huge blood-colored longsword, with blood surging on the blade and evil spirits circling. Demon Sword Yan Mo. Muqiu's mind moved, and the skeleton giant under him also raised his arm, and the strange blood blade in his hand was immediately entangled with black flames. Not good. Long Haoang saw the clue at this time, with panic in his eyes, and ordered the combat troops to focus all firepower on the skeleton giant. In an instant, countless artillery fire and missiles attacked Mu Chiu's direction with smoke and roars. There were also large numbers of mechas that took off into the air, all attacking the skeleton giant in the air. You showed me such spectacular fireworks, I should give you a reward. As soon as Mu Chiu finished speaking, the skeleton giant under him suddenly swung the bloody demon sword in his hand. The demon sword, surrounded by black gas and red flames, was swung out in an instant, and a large sea of fire suddenly turned into a rolling wave sweeping over the entire base. In an instant, the sky that had been baptized by the light cannon turned into a crimson color. Countless mecha shells were swallowed by the waves of the sea of fire before they approached the skeleton giant, turning into embers and merging into the flying dust. The power of the skeleton giant's sword strike was not weaker than the destructive light cannon released by the end-brain battleship. Countless people stared at the figure of the skeleton giant with their eyes wide open. It was hard to imagine that such a huge scene was caused by humans. The next second, the black gas and red flames were entangled behind the skeleton giant, turning into two wings of flowing fire, one black and one red. The skeleton giant soared into the sky, with blood in his empty eye sockets, and rushed towards the end-brain warship with a strange long sword in his hand. During the period, those who tried to stop the existence of this huge figure, whether it was the burly orcs or the mecha troops, were annihilated and collapsed under the swing of the demon sword. Then the soul was swallowed by the blood blade and turned into a blood soul undead driven by it. At this moment, a figure burning with blazing flames blocked the skeleton giant. The first knight of the Fenglan Knights, Long Haoang. Although Long Haoang's body at this moment has changed into a dragon man, and he is controlling the blazing fire. However, the forced promotion brought a strong load to his body, and after the battle with Ji Yufeng, his body was covered with visible scars, which made him reach the edge of the limit. Even so, Long Haoang still rushed towards the skeleton giant with a ferocious face, fighting to the death. Just as he attacked the skeleton giant, Long Haoang suddenly turned around, and his dragon claws were cold and attacked Mu Chiu on the top of the skeleton giant. Looking for death. A cold light flashed in Mu Chiu's eyes, and he manipulated the skeleton giant without changing his body shape, just waving the blood blade demon knife in his hand. With a flash of blood splashed in the sky. Long Haoang stared at the armored figure close at hand, but his outstretched arm had no power at all. With his eyes wide open, he tried his best to turn his head, but found that his lower body had fallen into the sky, and blood gushed out from the broken waist and abdomen like a fountain. A strong unwillingness appeared on his unrecognizable face, and Long Haoang's lips moved, as if he wanted to say something. But the next moment, the dragon man's body was burned to ashes by the spreading black flames. The first knight of the Fenglan Knights died. After dealing with Long Haoang, the skeleton giant rushed towards the towering battleship without stopping. During this period, the cannon of the battleship continued to emit magnificent beams of light. But the energy contained in these gunfires was absorbed by the skeleton giant, and his body rose several feet again. In a few breaths, the skeleton giant had already leaped over the towering battleship. Looking at the extremely tall city-destroying battleship in front of him, the blood will in Mu Chiu's pupils was running. The skeleton giant who was controlling it instantly understood, raised the magic knife blood blade in his hand and swung the knife down. With a loud bang, this unparalleled battleship made of special metal was cut into a deep gap. The battleship with limited power suddenly fell to the ground, and the earth trembled, shocking the mind. A series of dangerous alarms came from the battleship transformed by the terminal brain building. Mu Chiu turned a deaf ear to this, and manipulated the long sword in the hand of the skeleton giant to burst out black flames, transforming into a huge black dragon phantom, launching a devastating bombardment towards the warship. At this moment, the sky and the earth lost their color. The technological center of the entire Zilan base, the indestructible terminal brain building, finally showed large spiderweb-like cracks under such a strong attack. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 367. In the terminal building that was on the verge of collapse, piercing alarms echoed through the passage stairs. The surrounding walls made of special metal began to fall off rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The interior of the entire base flashed with a red light representing danger, and bright red blood oozed from the closed rooms on both sides. Under the violent impact of the battleship landing, the remaining humans in the terminal building could not withstand such a strong shock, and their bodies exploded into pools of blood. At this moment, the sound of light footsteps echoed in the passage of the building. Mu-Chiu, wearing a white shirt, entered the terminal building that was about to collapse at some point. The Lord of Eternal Night put the demon mask and the demon dragon heavy armor back into the box, and stepped lightly on the iron floor of the passage. The broken walls around them continued to fall, and corpses lying in a pool of blood appeared on both sides from time to time. But Mu-Chiu turned a blind eye to all this, with a faint smile on her face. Ignoring the crumbling surroundings, Mu-Chiu, who was wearing a white shirt, walked slowly in the forbidden area of the Zilan base as if taking a leisurely stroll. Just as Mu-Chiu passed by a closed laboratory, the door was suddenly pushed open from the inside, and the broken door collapsed instantly. An orc in a white coat staggered out of the door, with blood dripping from his forehead. With his strong body, he withstood the shock when the battleship fell. However, the moment the orc walked out, he saw the figure of Mu-Chiu who stopped. He instantly recognized the man in front of him, with a complex look on his face. A flash of determination flashed in the orc's eyes, and he roared and pounced on the handsome man in a white shirt. But the next second, the orc's body was strangely suspended in mid-air. As if being pulled by something, the half-orc in a white coat floated forward uncontrollably. The smiling man in front of him has become the abyss demon leading hell in the eyes of the orcs. The half-orc stared at Mu-Chiu's figure with trembling eyes, and saw that his dark and deep eyes suddenly turned to blood. 6 megatama circles surround each other like blood moons overlapping each other. Immediately afterwards, in the eyes of the orcs, another terrifying skeleton seemed to appear behind Mu-Chiu. In an instant, the soul of this burly half-orc emerged, his eyes were blank, and his body seemed to have turned into an empty shell, and he sat paralyzed on the ground. A soul emerged from the orc's body and turned into a light ball of light that merged into Mu-Chiu's hand. Looking at the soul source that could be held in one hand, Mu-Chiu's lips curved into a smile. With the genjutsu of the Mangekyo Sharinan, he can easily instill fear in the opponent. Coupled with the soul spell ability of the soul fruit, he can easily extract the soul origin that represents lifespan. This ability is perfect for cleaning up mobs and so on. Putting away the soul light group, for Mu-Chiu who has a long life, this little life is better than nothing for him. As the pace progressed, the surrounding walls collapsed faster and faster. After a while, Mu-Chiu relied on her perception and arrived at the destination of her trip. In front of him is a giant mechanical door made of special metal. And here is the top floor laboratory at the core of the terminal building. The arms were wrapped in black flames that devoured everything, and easily penetrated and destroyed the heavy mechanical door. Mu-Chiu slowly stepped into the mechanical door, and what came into view was a series of giant instruments full of technology. Thin pipelines are continuous on the wall, and the monitoring devices on the wall monitor the secrets of the entire base. The entire laboratory is even more vast, and there are strange ticking sounds coming from the precision instruments around it, mixed with the sound of footsteps echoing in the space. After a while, Mu-Chiu walked to the deepest part of the laboratory, where a cylindrical container stood straight to the top. All sides of the container are filled with pipes carrying green nutrient solution. And in the center of the container is a human head surrounded by circuits. Mu-Chiu stared at the brain with deep meaning for a moment, and then placed her gaze under the container where the brain was stored. At the left and right ends of the lower level of the cylindrical container, there are two strange containers several meters high. One is a capsule-shaped instrument similar to a sleeping chamber, which stands next to the container and is also connected to pipes. Lying quietly in the dormant chamber was a girl with long, straight black hair and an exquisite appearance. Her face was cold and her eyes were closed, like a princess who had been sleeping for a long time. And not far from the right side of the dormant cabin, there is a huge transparent sphere. The sphere is surrounded by dense air and full of vitality. Miuccio narrowed his eyes slightly, and he could feel the huge energy in them. What is stored in this sphere is nothing else. It is the extremely rich soul origin. It seems that the souls of the players trapped in the God's domain are all here. Soul energy on the order of 100,000. Staring at the giant sphere filled with the soul source in front of her, Miuccio had already made some considerations in her heart. This is probably the real purpose of Zilan Base. Imprison hundreds of thousands of human souls in the virtual world, and continuously extract the soul origin that represents life from their bodies. The sphere in front of him no longer stores pure soul energy, but a huge lifespan after tens of thousands of people are compressed. Ah! Just as Miuccio was thinking, a long sigh came from behind him. Miuccio turned his head and saw a shadow of an old man projected under the container. The old man had a kind face, an old appearance, and a thin body. www. Even more unbelievable, this old man was actually wearing a red robe. The visitor was the real controller of Zilan Base and the operator of the terminal brain building, Duan Muchen. Miuccio stared at the red robe of the old man, his eyes narrowed slightly. 12 Sacrifice Immortals. The person in power at Zilan Base was actually a senior cadre of the alien religion. Miuccio looked at the unremarkable old man in front of him with a deep look. According to Lucientian, the alien religion is controlled by 12 red-robed envoys of the destruction level, distributed all over the world. For a common purpose, the forces under his command are huge and extremely powerful. So far, he has come into contact with 3 top-level controllers of the heterogeneous religion. Whether it is the strange monk Wufa who is half Taoist and half Buddhist, or the nightmare who transforms into thousands of souls to create the soul world, they all give people the feeling of being powerful and having strange abilities. But the kind-looking old man in front of him looks like an old man next door at first glance. It is really hard to associate him with the cruel and evil heterogeneous religion. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 368. Your ambition is really not small. As the person in charge of the Zilan Base, the real power of Duan Muchen is not his strength, but his mind that far exceeds the limits of human beings. Combat mechas, space portals, laser weapons. A series of high-tech equipment at the Zilan Base that are beyond the forefront of mankind are all made by this scientific genius. Miuccio looked at the brain in the petri dish, then glanced at Shwekinya in the dormant cabin and the ball container filled with soul energy next to her, and suddenly said, "You're really a lunatic." The old man's projection smiled and said, "Just to survive, you have to pay some price." At this point, with Miuccio's attainments in the soul, combined with all the things that exist here, how could he not guess Duan Muchen's final intention? Such a huge soul source here was obviously prepared for him alone. And it is naturally difficult for an ordinary person's body to withstand such a huge amount of soul energy. Shwekinya, who has a special physique, became the best choice for the soul container. This is Duan Muchen's ultimate goal. Cooperate with the ability of Nightmare to control Shwekinya's mind, occupy her body, and form a body seizing in a sense. And Shwekinya's body, which is fused with 100,000 levels of soul energy, not only has a nearly long life, but her strength will definitely rise to the peak of destruction level. Shwekinya also accommodated the Apocalypse key, so the Apocalypse mecha was naturally included in her pocket. At that time, Duanmuchin, who had seized Shwekinya's body, was sitting on two destruction-level holy objects, and he himself had also climbed to the destruction-level level. Such powerful strength is rare in the entire apocalypse. Duanmuchin, who had seen through Muqiu's intentions, did not panic and said with a charitable face, "You know, little friend, you and the Yanjai dynasty behind you have been targeted by the holy cult." So, Muqiu's eyes narrowed slightly, as the nightmare had said similar words before. The Zilan base is a backbone force that the holy religion has vigorously cultivated. Your destruction has shaken part of the foundation of the holy religion. Duanmuchin consoled him with sincerity. You still don't understand the true terror of the holy religion, which is completely beyond the power of human beings to resist. Muqiu stared at the projection of the old man in front of her with a deep gaze. You mean? If possible, Muqiu would like to take out the brain above and torture it. But after experiencing the lessons of the last enlightenment, Muqiu knew that the soul memories of these emissaries had been blocked by some powerful force. Forcibly cutting in would risk backlash. Until then, Duanmuchin finally revealed his purpose. My little friend, you might as well join us. With your strong strength, you will win a place even in the holy cult. There will naturally be unlimited benefits by then, and immortality will no longer be a fantasy. Why do you need to be a frog in a well in this end of the world? Immortal. The corners of Muqiu's mouth curled up slightly, just when Duanmuchin thought his persuasion was effective. Muqiu looked at the old man with burning eyes. I'm sorry, in this apocalypse, as long as my voice is enough. After saying that, Muqiu suddenly waved her hand and smashed it into the spherical container next to her that was filled with soul essence. In an instant, a large hole was punched out of the container made of special metal, and a steady stream of soul energy was sucked into Muqiu's body. Until then, the expression on Duanmuchin's face finally became emotional. Wait a minute, I have a way to make these souls return to their bodies. There is still room for negotiation between us. The lives of the players who died in the divine world are trapped here, and their bodies have all turned into soulless bodies. Don't you really care about these hundreds of thousands of dead souls who have nowhere to go? Duanmuchin's tone was hoarse, as if he was denouncing a bloody butcher and executioner. What do 100,000 dead souls have to do with me? There was no unnecessary expression on Muqiu's face, and the devouring power in her body was running wildly. In an instant, all the 100,000 level compressed pure essence had been absorbed. The entire terminal battleship is on the verge of complete collapse. The walls of the top floor laboratory began to peel off in large areas, and even cracks appeared on the petri dish container where the brain was stored. It was no longer easy for Duanmuchin to keep up his appearance of charity, so he finally tore off the disguise. Staring at Muqiu's figure entangled in the power of the source with a ferocious face, he said fiercely, "Kill the emissaries and destroy our holy religion. You will definitely be killed for my holy religion. You will not be tolerated by the world. Your soul will go to the endless hell and you will never be able to escape forever." Noisy. Muqiu's hands burned with black flames that swallowed up all things, and suddenly blasted towards the giant container in the sky. In an instant, under the destructive power of the black flame, the entire battleship reached the limit of collapse in an instant. Boom! Along with a bang that spread throughout the Zilan base, the sky-high ship transformed into the building in the center of the base completely collapsed. The aftermath of the explosion stretched for tens of miles, and all the surrounding construction machinery was reduced to ashes in this shocking explosion. The moment the battleship exploded, a slender figure appeared on the street more than 10 miles away. As the aftermath of the explosion subsided, Muqiu, wearing thin clothes, appeared on the collapsed street with a pretty girl in his arms. At the moment when Muqiu appeared, countless shadowy soldiers on both sides of the street all knelt on the ground. With his head slightly lowered, his red eyes dimmed, as if he was welcoming a supreme king. The demon palace and the skeleton soldiers disappeared. They were originally manifested by Muqiu using the pupil technique of the Sheri-nan. A black shadow vortex appeared in front of him. Muqiu sent Shueqianya into the black shadow space and looked around. www. Bloodstains can be seen everywhere on the damaged streets, and the surrounding buildings have collapsed into ruins. Some broken mecha wreckage can be seen on both sides, and incomplete corpses can be seen everywhere. In the distance, a large number of humans were squatting with their heads in their hands. Some of them were surviving civilians, and some were members of the combat unit who chose to surrender. At this moment, a white figure covered in blood passed through the space and appeared in front of Muqiu. All those who tried to escape have been dealt with. Ji Yufeng lowered his head slightly and said so. Muqiu smiled and nodded. Thank you for your hard work. After that, Muqiu looked around the whole place, and the entire Zilan base seemed to be in a strange dead silence. Muqiu suddenly turned around and looked at the dark alley in the distance with a hint of meaning. It's about time for you to come out, right? As Muqiu finished speaking, a rustling sound came from the deep alley. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 369. A few seconds later, a team of hundreds of people walked out of the deep alley in the distance. The leaders were Luo Ziyuan, Mao Yuming, Asing, and other core members of the resistance army whom Muqiu had seen. After being pointed out by Muqiu about their hiding place, these people led the resistance army to walk out of the shadows in the alley. I don't know what props they used, but they were able to hide their bodies to a great extent, and even their breathing was barely audible. If it weren't for Muqiu's strong perception after absorbing the huge soul origin, it would be possible to ignore them inadvertently. Luo Ziyuan led several companions of the resistance army to come forward, and tried his best to show a smile on his face. Brother Qiu, you really opened our eyes. Who would have thought that the awakened person with superpowers who was brought in casually at the beginning was actually the leader of a huge force? Luo Ziyuan kept a smile on his face, but he was already complaining in his heart. Is this considered letting the wolf into the house? Although the high-level rulers of the Zilan base were destroyed because of this. But this Zilan base will not be the Zilan base of their resistance army after all. Just when the resistance army was hesitating secretly, a large group of strange butterflies suddenly floated in the sky. The butterflies in the sky gathered beside Muqiu, revealing a delicate young girl. The girl was Dyer, who had fought with Nightmare before. Dyer came to Muqiu and whispered, "I'm sorry, brother," in the end, he still let him escape. The girl's red eyes drooped and dimmed, her hands folded behind her back, like a child who had done something wrong. Muqiu smiled and shook his head, rubbing the girl's red hair. That kind of tricky guy is not so easy to catch. Just with his own ability, he is enough to build a soul space, so Nightmare's strength is naturally extraordinary. Besides, Nightmare's body has thousands of souls, and I don't know how many tricks he has left for himself. The Nightmare here died, and he still left a soul in the ruins of other cities. Even if Muqiu took action himself, he could not guarantee that he could annihilate all the Nightmares scattered in various cities at the same time. After simply comforting Dyer, Muqiu turned his eyes to the rebels in front of him. He looked at Luo Ziyuan and his group and chuckled. I don't have any bad feelings towards the rebels. Now that the Zilan base has been destroyed, I can point out two ways out for you. Then, Muqiu smiled like a spring breeze on his face, and said with a calm smile, surrender, or die. In an instant, the rebels who thought that things had turned around suddenly fell to the bottom of the valley like riding a roller coaster. And Luo Ziyuan, the leader of the rebels, looked even more embarrassed. To be honest, the reason why the rebels did not move throughout the whole process was that they were waiting for both sides to suffer losses. and then suddenly took action to take advantage of the fishermen. But they did not expect that the Yonjai dynasty was so strong that they completely crushed the troops of the Zilan base before they took action. Many rebels were already extremely afraid of the giant skeleton in the sky, and they had no intention of fighting against it. For a moment, surrender or death seemed to be their only choice. Luo Ziyuan frowned even more. Did their years of dormancy finally fail? Seeing that the rebels had not taken any action, the dark shadow monsters around them exuded a palpitating sense of oppression. The red eyes flashed, as if they were going to drag the creatures in front of them into eternal darkness in the next second. Alas, let them go, we will surrender. A long sigh came from the deep alley behind, and the sigh was mixed with a bit of weirdness. A long and narrow shadow walked out of the deep alley, and everyone looked over and exclaimed, "Joe, Professor Joe." A short figure with a deformed body only the size of a palm and a face as weird as an alien walked out slowly. The man who came was the real leader of the resistance army, and he was also a scientific research professor at Zilan base. Zhou Yi, who developed the third holy object of Zilan base, Apocalypse Mecha. Zhou Yi was short, but his speed was not slow. He stood with his hands behind his back and walked to the front of the resistance army. Some of the surrounding resistance soldiers immediately made way for him. It can be seen that Zhou Yi has a high prestige among the resistance army. Zhou Yi looked at the resistance soldiers behind him, then looked at Mu Qiu, and sighed in a special baby voice. After all, we resistance soldiers just hope to make a living in the end times. As for who we live under, how can it be so important? I just hope that you don't forget your nature like Duan Muchen and harm the human race. Zhou Yi's attitude has already compromised, and most of the resistance soldiers behind him can't help but breathe a sigh of relief. They really didn't have the courage to fight these monsters of the Eternal Night Dynasty. Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes and looked at the inconspicuous little man on the ground, smiling. That's good, but I still want to ask you about Duan Muchen and the alien religion. The mysterious alien religion has regarded Mu Qiu as a thorn in its side, and Mu Qiu also needs to know some secrets about the alien religion. As the leader of the alien religion, among the 12 priests, Wu Fa and Menyan's origins are no longer traceable. If you want to spy on the information of the alien religion, you have to find some clues from Duan Muchen's experience. Zhou Yi is old and cunning, how could he not know Mu Qiu's purpose? His strange face showed a look of reminiscence, and he said, Duan Muchen was once a scientific research professor respected by thousands of people, using technology to protect the safety of 100,000 people. But all this changed after he got a serious illness. Zhou Yi looked at the collapsed terminal brain warship in the distance, his eyes deep. He has brain cancer. When Zhou Yi told the truth, the eyes of the people around him were slightly surprised. No one thought that the actual person in charge of Zilan base actually had this terminal illness. Duan Muchen, who knew that he had little time left, was unwilling to die, so he found me. We conducted a series of seemingly crazy scientific experiments together, and I even used myself as the experimental material to turn myself into this weird look. Zhou Yi's appearance was actually caused by his own experiments. Everyone's eyes became extremely surprised, and they looked at Zhou Yi, whose body was only the size of a palm, in disbelief. They had always thought that Professor Zhou, whom they admired, was detained by Zilan base and forcibly transformed into this. I didn't expect Zhou Yi to be a scientific lunatic. Don't look at me like this. Zhou Yi smiled bitterly, everyone has selfishness, and I am no exception. My physical condition is not much better than Duan Muchen. I have already sensed that the end is coming. In order to prolong my limited life, I agreed to Duan Muchen's series of crazy plans. But gradually, Duan Muchen's experiments became more and more pathological, and he even began to treat the survivors in the base as experimental subjects. More and more survivors have become victims of experiments, and they regard human lives as worthless. This is something I cannot tolerate. Duan Muchen also saw my thoughts and gradually wanted to kill me. Then Jiu Wen took me to escape from the central area and set up a resistance army to fight against Zilan base. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 370. As for Duan Muchen joining the heterogeneous religion, it should have happened not long before I escaped from the terminal brain building. Wrinkles appeared on Zhou Yi's dry skin. I don't know what they talked about specifically, but I remember one thing deeply. Oh? What is it? Mu Qiu stared intently. Duan Muchen also persuaded me to join the heterogeneous religion with the holy object, and the condition he gave was immortality. It was this huge temptation that prompted Duan Muchen to join the heterogeneous religion. Zhou Yi and Mu Qiu looked at each other with a firm gaze. Although I intend to prolong my life, I also know that the heterogeneous religion is not tolerated by the human race, so how could I help the cult persecute my compatriots? Zhou Yi's words were firm, his tone was firm, and his righteous appearance moved countless resistance fighters around him. Mu Qiu retracted his gaze and glanced at Zhou Yi with a hint of meaning. It was unknown whether Zhou Yi's words were true or false, and Mu Qiu was skeptical. People become wiser as they age, let alone the leader of the resistance army who has survived the apocalypse until now. Mu Qiu did not believe that Zhou Yi, whose life was about to end, would still care about the lives of several human compatriots. Most likely, there was some conflict between the two, and Duan Muchen had murderous intentions, which forced Zhou Yi to flee quickly. However, Mu Qiu did not care about this, as long as Zhou Yi was obedient enough and showed enough value. He could even divide a part of his soul to prolong his life. Zhou Yi seemed not to see Mu Qiu's meaningful expression, and sighed to the sky. After all, we are too narrow-minded. Eternal life is just an illusion. Everything has reincarnation. How can mortals fight against the fate of birth, aging, sickness and death? Mu Qiu smiled and echoed. Yes, who in this world can live forever? Although the conversation with Zhou Yi did not get any secrets of the alien religion, it also revealed some important information. The following process was very easy. Mu Qiu conquered the entire rebel alliance. He also ordered the Black Shadow Corps to cooperate with the rebels to gather the remaining combat troops in the base. The entire Zilan base will be incorporated into the territory of the Yanjai dynasty. Of course, Mu Qiu did not forget to do some hands and feet on Zhou Yi. For the leader of the rebels, Mu Qiu still had to set up some guarantees. The territory of Zilan base is huge. After the shocking battle between the two forces, the civilian area is relatively intact. But the central area where the dignitaries are located is much more miserable. The entire war was carried out around the terminal brain building in the central area. Countless buildings around it were destroyed and collapsed, and the streets were razed to the ground under the explosion. It can be seen that the post-war repair work will continue for a long time. Mu Qiu handed everything over to Zhou Yi, Luo Ziyuan and other rebels, and he habitually became a hands-off boss. Before leaving, Mu Qiu did not forget to warn Zhou Yi to build a transmission device connecting Zilan and Yuhe. Zilan base holds the spatial coordinates of Yuhe, so it is not difficult to build a portal. Standing on a high-tech building, Mu Qiu looked up at the far end of the sky. The sun sets and dusk is coming. It's almost time to go back. Mu Qiu smiled, and a black shadow vortex suddenly appeared in front of him. At the same time, in a dark forbidden area. In this dead space and time seemed to be stagnant, weird and silent. In the center of the space, a 12-pointed star white magic circle is engraved. Suddenly, a crimson flame ignited in one corner of the magic circle. Then, crimson soul fires rose in other corners. Only the two star corners on the west side were dim, lonely, and dark. The 10 soul fires each occupied a corner of the magic circle, representing the rising flames of the soul. A low voice came from the rising soul fire. The Zilan base was destroyed, and even Kington died in the hands of the Lord of Eternal Night. First it was the evil, and then Kington. Is this Eternal Night dynasty deliberately against us? A violent voice echoed in the dark space. It seems that every core envoy of the heterogeneous religion has his own code name here. It's a pity for that dragon man. We were planning to train him to become a new source of fire. Even the precious candle dragon soul was lost by him. What a waste. The Zilan base is the foundation of our establishment in the Dongxiao region. Our plan will be constrained by this destruction. A hoarse voice said. This Lord of the Eternal Night can't stay any longer. If we let this boy develop, it's hard to guarantee that it won't ruin our plan. We must destroy the Eternal Night dynasty as soon as possible. At this moment, a sinister and evil laugh came out. He, leave this matter to me. Oh? How do you want to fight against the Eternal Night dynasty? That low voice came out. The 12 priests have their own hidden identities in various bases and cannot be easily revealed to the world. Just like the Master Wufa, codenamed Ziui, and Duan Mu Chen, called Kington. They are all the leaders of a faction. If they were to expose their identities that they had hidden for many years in advance for the sake of the Eternal Night dynasty, it would be too unworthy. The Eternal Night dynasty has annexed 2 major bases in one fell swoop, and the momentum is strong, but don't forget that things will turn against each other. I believe that other bases in the East Sky domain will not let the Eternal Night dynasty dominate alone, right? The low voice came out again. Then this matter is left to you, we will all give you convenience in the dark. This time, the Eternal Night dynasty and the Lord of the Eternal Night must be completely wiped out. In the dark, unknown to no one, a storm conspiracy against the Eternal Night dynasty is quietly underway. In the middle of the night, the full moon is in the sky, and the stars are twinkling. The moonlight shines brightly in the quiet city below. The entire Yuhei base fell into a deep sleep. Only around the streets, there are still figures with red eyes flashing from time to time. And in the central high-rise building deep in the Yuhei base, the windows on the top floor are slightly closed, and strands of cool air flow into the office through the window sill. The whole office was silent, with only the occasional sound of turning pages. A beautiful figure was sitting at the desk next to the French window. The woman was wearing a white military uniform, with a pretty face, slightly frowned eyebrows, a straight nose, and a hair tied up to her waist. She couldn't help but exude a cold breath that kept people away from her. The woman was carefully flipping through the documents in her hands, scribbling on them from time to time, with her eyebrows slightly frowned like an iceberg. With the 3-leader pattern of Yuhei base being broken, most of the rules and regulations need to be rectified under the high-level purge. There are also daily resource allocations at the base, the division of awakened teams, the belonging of new survivors, etc., which all need to be reviewed by the woman herself. In the long run, even the once strong iceberg goddess felt a little exhausted. The woman was Xiao Hanyan, one of the 3 leaders of Yuhei base, known as the Iceberg Jade Girl. Just as Xiao Hanyan was carefully handling the documents, a black shadow emerged from behind her. The next moment, accompanied by a breeze, a black robe was draped over her thin shoulders. Who? Feeling a slight sag on her shoulders, Xiao Hanyan's cold eyes condensed and she looked back suddenly. This glance made Xiao Hanyan stand still. I saw Mu Qiu standing behind Xiao Hanyan with a smile in a white shirt, and put his fingers on the latter's white eyebrows. Suddenly, a coolness filled Xiao Hanyan's limbs and bones, and she felt very comfortable. Mu Qiu stared at the woman's increasingly thin figure and smiled softly. You have worked hard during this period. Warm Ti.